Welcome everybody to our At Home with Theosophy. This is our second class. We have some new people, so welcome. In our last meeting we went through an introduction that is not really part of Leadbeater's book. It was taken from another book that he wrote, The Astral Plane, because what we are going to explore about the dreams, as we are going to see, has a lot to do with what happens on the astral plane. So we try to review the main aspects of that subject that will be needed to understand our present topic. So today we are going to start exploring this particular subject, and as we normally do, we will go through what Leadbeater explained. I bring some excerpts from his book, and then I will make some comments. You feel free to ask questions or make comments as we proceed. And then at the end, we always will have some time also for exchange. So if you want to wait to the end, that's also good. I have today with me Marina. She's going to read the excerpts for you. So let us begin with the first slide.
Mechanism of consciousness. Let us first consider rather carefully the mechanism, physical, etheric, and astral, by means of which impressions are conveyed to our consciousness.
Leadbeater had a quite scientific mind, and the way he approached things was in that particular way. So normally when we read about dreams, people go directly to the experience of dreaming. But as we are going to see, the experience of dreaming, or what we remember when we wake up of that experience, is not necessarily exactly what happened. There are many things that affect our perception. So if we are going to have a correct understanding of that experience that we call dreams, then we need to know what are the different possibilities that may affect this experience of dreaming, or also its memory. As we are going to see, there are certain aspects that relate to our body, not only to the physical body, but also to our subtle bodies, that may affect the experience of dreaming or its recollection. So it is important to begin to keeping this in mind, so that we can make an intelligent assessment of what we call a dream.
Number 1, the physical aspect. We have in our bodies a great central axis of nervous matter ending in the brain, and from this a network of nerve threads radiates in every direction through the body. It is these nerve threads, according to modern scientific theory, which convey all impressions from without to the brain, and the latter, upon receipts of these impressions, translates them into sensations or perceptions.
So he begins to explore the part of the nervous system, and this will be important as we are going to see. But the idea is that we receive impressions that, suppose this is in normal consciousness. We touch something, and that touching the object produces certain electrochemical reactions in our nerves, that they are communicated to the brain, and somehow the brain, or as we are going to see later, some subtle aspects of the brain, not the physical brain necessarily, but what we call the brain, let's say, transforms emotion that is electrochemical into a sensation or a perception. This is a problem in science. It's called, in the philosophy of science, the hard problem of consciousness. Hard because it's hard to solve it, it's hard to understand. From the scientific point of view, consciousness is the result of this electrochemical activity. So they don't know, there is a gap between depolarization in the membrane of the neurons, which is an interchange of sodium and potassium from the environment, how that is transformed into a visual or a tactile or any sensorial stimulus. So they don't know how that works, and in the theosophical view we postulate that the process is far more complex and involves some other aspects of our being, not only the physical one.
Now, this brain of ours is very readily affected by slight variations in our general health, and most especially by any which involve a change in the circulation of the blood through it. When the flow of blood through the vessels of the head is normal and regular, the brain, and therefore the whole nervous system, is at liberty to function in an orderly and efficient manner. But any alteration in this normal circulation, either as to quantity, quality, or speed, immediately produces a corresponding effect on the brain, and through it on the nerves throughout the body.
Here he's talking about something that normally we don't consider too important, but when we are talking about transferring a perception from the inner planes to the physical plane, it becomes very important. In normal circumstances, as he's going to explain, if the flow of blood through the brain is not good enough, we may get sleepy or something like that. But if this is happening while, for example, when we are awakening, and while the consciousness that was having some activity on different planes from the physical, while that consciousness was coming to the brain, if something like this happens, it may distort the memory of what happens. Actually, in some other books, he says that this is why the psychic research, the clairvoyant research that they did, is so difficult, because even a problem of digestion may distort what you saw on higher planes, and when you are bringing it down to the physical plane, because the brain is not working properly, maybe your body is having a hard time digesting and there is not enough blood flowing through the brain, that fact will distort what you saw on higher planes if you were clairvoyant, for example. So even people who are not clairvoyant, when we remember a dream, if this dream is a remembrance from what happens on the inner planes, as we are going to see, then the remembrance may be affected by how the brain is working.
If the supply of oxygen to the brain be deficient, it becomes overcharged with carbon dioxide, and heaviness and lethargy very shortly supervene. If the speed with which the blood flows through the vessels is too great, it produces fever. If too slow, then again lethargy is caused.
So these are some examples of the effect that happened on the physical body at the level of the waking consciousness. But as I said, and as we are going to see, these affect more dramatically what we perceive from the inner planes.
It is obvious, therefore, that our brain, through which, be it remembered, all physical impressions must pass, may very easily be disturbed and more or less hindered in the due performance of its functions by causes apparently trivial, causes to which we probably often pay no attention whatever even during waking hours, of which we should almost certainly be entirely ignorant during sleep.
Now, the reason why this is important to begin with, and all the other processes that we are going to explain tonight, is that at a certain point in our growth, what we call dreams, the remembrance from experience on the higher planes, may have an important role even in our waking consciousness. As long as the dreams are just curiosities and are things that have no necessarily impact on our daily life, well, it doesn't matter much if you remember well or not what you had dreamt. After all, it's just an imagination in your mind. But as I said, in the spiritual life, there is a period where consciousness begins to be able to learn on the inner planes. And when waking up, all that knowledge is transferred to the brain, even if not in a very conscious way. Many times all this is transferred in a more unconscious manner. So if there is a conscious remembrance of certain things and they are distorted by these mechanisms that we are going to explore, then unless we know about that possibility, if we start giving if we begin to consider our dreams as something important, but we give them an importance without having the discernment that these things may affect what we remember from the experience, then we may be led astray. And we are going to see as the class goes on how dreams can be of help in the spiritual life. Normally, as I said in the previous class, we tend to look at the whole world from the point of view of the personality and the physical plane. How things can be helpful for my personal life. So a person dreams of a number, and the first thing that the person thinks is of, using it to win the lottery or something like that. In the Theosophical path, we have the view that the real is our inner self, and that our physical life and our life in all the planes, the real purpose of this is to be able to realize the inner self. So whatever happens on the inner planes may help us to lead a physical life that is conducive to the spiritual development and growth. So this is why when dreams may begin to help us in that direction, we need to know how to interpret them, not in terms of if you dream with water, what it means, because as we are going to see, that also is normally quite personal. But in a deeper way, we need to understand what possibilities are there for error or to misinterpret, and we are going to see all this during the class. I'm just trying to point out why this is important, because it's something that is not normally talked about when exploring dreams.
Before we pass on, one other peculiarity of this physical mechanism must be noted, and that is its remarkable tendency to repeat automatically vibrations to which it is accustomed to respond. It is to this property of the brain that are to be attributed all those bodily habits and tricks of manner which are entirely independent of the will and are often so difficult to conquer. And, as will presently be seen, it plays an even more important part during sleep than it does in our waking life.
So the body, the physical body, has this ability to fall into habits. This is very useful for certain things. When we learn for the first time how to drive, we have to think every motion, and then we develop the habit. That is called the muscle memory, and then we don't have to think about it. The body knows how to do it. We just have to be present. So the body has this ability to generate habits and repeat them. Now, this quality of the body may become an obstacle when we are trying to perceive deeper aspects of life, because the body is very good to relate to the physical world. It is built to relate to the physical world, but then that same body may become an obstacle when we want to perceive something beyond the physical world. And I'm not talking necessarily about psychic perception or clairvoyance. I'm talking about listening to the spiritual voice, developing wisdom, understanding life from a deeper perspective. In particular with dreams, because our brain, as part of the body, has the tendency to repeat impressions, many times whatever the brain was was perceiving during the day will affect in a very important way how it will receive the remembrance from what was happening on the inner planes while the brain was asleep. So if during the day we were worried, then when we go to sleep and when we wake up, that tendency to repeat the worry many times distorts the memory of a dream, the memory of something that may have been an actual experience on the inner planes. So for this reason, the waking life and the dreaming life, the life on the physical plane and the life on the inner planes, they affect each other. They are a continuity in a certain way. So part of the process, discipline, to begin to open up to this deeper experience of life on the inner planes is to set the physical life in order. It all comes together. You cannot really just not pay attention to one aspect and suppose that it's not going to affect another aspect. But we are going to talk about all this more in later classes.
Number 2, Etheric Aspect. It is not alone through the brain to which we have hitherto been referring, however, that impressions may be received by the person. Almost exactly coextensive with and interpenetrating its visible form is his etheric double, and that also has a brain which is really no less physical than the other, though composed of matter in a condition finer than the gaseous.
If you see here in the table that you have on the screen, on the physical plane, there are two principles according to the Theosophical view: the physical body and the etheric double. The physical body is the dense aspect of ourselves that we perceive with our five senses. And in the Theosophical view, it is said that there is an etheric or subtler counterpart of the physical body, which is the bridge between the body that is material and the soul that is immaterial. And I'm using the word soul in a general way. So we have things, for example, the astral body. If you see there in the diagram or the table, the astral body is not physical. The physical body is physical. How can something that is immaterial affect something that is material? This is a problem in philosophy. They call it the ghost in the machine. They say if the mind is immaterial and the body is material, then it's like a ghost trying to drive a machine. It cannot interact with it. Well, the idea is that the etheric double is like a bridge because it responds to both the material and the immaterial. So it has a quality of both aspects. It is still physical, but is subtler than the dense matter and therefore can respond to what is immaterial. So the idea is that in the same way that we have a physical brain, there is a subtler counterpart to the brain that is what we can call the etheric brain. This etheric brain has the function of passing the bioelectrical impulses that are happening at the level of the physical organ, passing that and transforming that into sensations at the level of the astral body. And therefore, it's part of the mechanism of consciousness. If there is a disruption in the etheric brain, then there will be a disruption in the physical or in the perception of the physical world.
Now this etheric is the vehicle of the human vital force, called in Sanskrit Prana, and anyone who has developed the psychic faculties can see exactly how this is so. He will see the solar life principle almost colorless, though intensely luminous and active, which is constantly poured into the Earth's atmosphere by the sun. He will see how the etheric part of his spleen absorbs this universal life and specializes it into prana, so that it may be more readily assimilable by his body.
One important aspect of the etheric double is to generate a kind of vitality that the body can use. This is, as he says, what in Hinduism they call prana, or in Chinese philosophy the qi. So the etheric counterpart of the spleen is the one that takes the prana that comes from the sun and that is all around us, and that is a kind of universal vital force, and specializes that into a kind of prana that we can assimilate and that the body can use to keep on functioning. Now, as we are going to see, the flow of prana is very important in transferring physical vibrations to consciousness.
He will see how prana courses all over that body, running along every nerve thread in tiny globules of lovely rosy light, and how, when the rose-colored particles have been absorbed, the superfluous life principle finally radiates from the body in every direction as bluish-white light.
So this is how the clairvoyant sees this. He described this in other books also. This is how he saw all this. So there is an almost colorless kind of vitality that comes from the sun. Then it is absorbed in the body and turned into some kind of pinkish or rosy globules that go around the body. Then that vitality is absorbed, and the leftover goes out of the human body in this kind of bluish light that some people may see when they see the etheric double. Many times they see with this bluish white light, and that is because it's the vitality that we are pouring out. That is the prana that is already used by human beings, although then it can be that kind of bluish prana can be used by other species.
If he examines further into the action of this life principle, he will soon see that the transmission of impressions to the brain depends rather upon its regular flow along the etheric portion of the nerve threads than upon the mere vibration of the particles of their denser invisible portion, as is commonly supposed.
So at the beginning of this chapter, Leadbeater said, according to science, impressions are transmitted to the brain by this electric nerve impression, or what we know now more specifically in the science of the 21st century is an electrochemical reaction. So he says, according to science, that's what transmits the impressions to the brain. But what he says here is that to the clairvoyant side, these electrochemical reactions actually follow the flow of prana. And as he is going to explain, if you in some way stop the flow of prana, then this electrochemical reaction doesn't produce an impression in the brain.
When a finger becomes entirely numbed with cold, it is incapable of feeling, and the same phenomenon of insensibility may readily be produced at will by a mesmerizer, who by a few passes over the arm of his subject will bring it into a condition in which it may be pricked with a needle or burnt by the flame of a candle without the slightest sensation of pain being experienced. Now, why does the subject feel nothing in either of these two cases?
The idea is that, as he's going to show very briefly, both the cold and the effect of the idea of a mesmerizer was at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. Mesmerism was quite famous, and there were people that were able to do some passes over another person, so that the person would not feel physical stimulus. Today also that happens with some people that practice hypnotism or similar things. In the East, they are the fakirs or some Hindu hatha yogis. They know how to manipulate the flow of prana, so they can pierce their body and not even blood will flow, and they won't feel any pain. So Leadbeater is asking here if it all depends on this electrochemical reaction. How come that when these things are done by this mesmerizer, the brain cannot feel anything? There has to be something else going on there.
The nerve threads are still there, and though in the first case it might be contended that their action was paralyzed by cold and by the absence of blood from the vessels, this certainly cannot be the reason in the second case, where the arm retains its normal temperature and the blood circulates as usual.
This is not too different also from when we go into surgery and you have an anesthetic. Then what happens, according to Theosophy, is that the etheric double is removed from the physical. So even though you may have the electrochemical reactions going on and going to the brain, because the prana is not flowing and bringing the impressions to the brain, then the brain doesn't feel it. And he will show how this happens in these cases that he was describing.
If we call in the aid of the clairvoyant, he will tell us that the reason why the frozen finger seems dead and the blood is unable to circulate through its vessels is because the rosy life ether is no longer coursing along the nerve threads. For we must remember that though matter in the etheric condition is invisible to ordinary sight, it is still purely physical and therefore can be affected by the action of cold or heat.
Yeah, so let's go to the next one.
In the second case, he will tell us that when the mesmerizer makes the passes by which he renders the subject's arm insensible, what he really does is to pour his own nerve ether, or magnetism as it is often called, into the arm, thereby driving back for the time that of the subject. The arm is still warm and living because there is still life ether coursing through it. But since it is no longer the subject's own specialized life ether and is therefore not en rapport with his brain, it conveys no information to that brain, and consequently there is no sense of feeling in the arm.
So basically what this person is doing is pouring out part of his own prana, and because that prana belongs to him and not to the other person, the brain cannot read that kind of prana because that prana was specialized by this other person's spleen, not by the subject of this experiment, let's say. Now, this, knowing that he goes, as you can see, quite into detail about how impressions go from the physical to the etheric and to consciousness, because it has an impact in many different aspects. For example, even when we want to meditate, something that most meditation teachers will tell you is the need to have your back straight. Then the reason for having the back straight is so that the prana can circulate in a proper way. Because if the prana is not circulating properly, then your brain is not going to be working properly. Also, many times breathing exercises are recommended, many times at the beginning of the meditation for the same reason. Now, if you are going to be there just sitting, there may be not many differences or much difference between having a lot of prana going on or not. You will feel just a little more sleepy or less sleepy. But if in your meditation you are trying to attain a higher state of consciousness, to understand something from a higher point of view, to stimulate the wisdom that is intrinsic in us, then it is very important that the brain is receptive. Because you may have an insight, but if the brain is not able to receive it without distortion, then for all that matters to you in your waking consciousness is like if you had never had the insight. So it is important when we are in pursuit of the spiritual life to understand that the physical body needs to be healthy. Some people say, well, after all, we are not the body, then why should it be healthy? But although that doesn't affect the spirit itself, so to say, or the inner aspect of our being, a physical body that is not working properly will be an obstacle for us in our waking consciousness to retain higher impressions. So all this mechanism can explain a little, and we are going to see how this is transmitted to the inner person, to the astral body, and from there up to the mental and causal. But all this mechanism is important to keep it in mind, to recognize the need to pay attention. This is also why, for example, it is recommended to meditate when your stomach is empty, because if you meditate after eating and most of the blood is being spent in trying to digest the food, then again the brain is not going to be as receptive as it should be, and you may miss these higher perceptions.
Lee asks, what is the status of prana when a person is sleeping?
When the person is sleeping, there is a working out of the prana, sorry. The physical elemental, which is like the consciousness of the physical body, devotes most of its energy when the body is asleep to repair the body and try to bring back the harmony and balance. There is a lot of prana that is left over that has not been eliminated, so that's also something that happens. But all this activity of the physical elemental requires prana for the physical elemental to work. It is said that this is why from an occult point of view, occult in the sense of taking into account what is hidden, what is not easily seen, it is good to go to sleep early rather than late, because in the first part of the night there is in the environment there is still prana from the sun that the physical elemental can use. If you go to sleep late when the prana is already exhausted, then the physical elemental has less energy to use to repair the body. So it is normally, there used to be this saying that the early part of the night was like 1 hour sleeping in the early part of the night was worth 3 hours of sleeping in the late part of the night. So of course our life may not allow us to go to sleep too early, but within what our life allows, we should try to go to sleep early rather than late, so that the physical elemental can use the leftover prana that is in the environment. Now Janet has another question.
How would a compression fracture in the T12 vertebra affect one's meditation?
I would say that depends on how the etheric double is working there, because when something happens on the physical body, then the etheric double is also affected at the moment of the fact or the accident in this case. But the etheric double can be repaired even if the physical part cannot. The etheric double is, as it is not so dense, is far more fluid. So prana really flows through the etheric double, as we saw, not through the physical nerves. Of course, you need some amount of physical electrochemical impulse going through the vertebrae, but if you are able to move your limbs and all that, that means that is happening. So in principle, it shouldn't affect much. If the etheric double is working properly, the prana will go naturally in the appropriate way. If at the beginning, the etheric double may need some time to heal, but after a few years, I know that this happened to you some years ago, it shouldn't affect much. So yeah, that's it.
Now, just as any change in the circulation of the blood affects the receptivity of the denser brain matter and thus modifies the reliability of the impressions derived through it, so the condition of the etheric portion of the brain is affected by any change in the volume or the velocity of these life currents.
So yeah, we were saying it's not so much that the blood affects the etheric double, but blood is the carrier, the physical carrier of prana. So if there is not enough blood or there is too much blood, then the same will happen at the level of prana. So this is why the mechanism of consciousness can be affected by something physical.
For example, when the quantity of nerve ether specialized by the spleen falls for any reason below the average, physical weakness and weariness are immediately felt. If, under these circumstances, it also happens that the speed of its circulation is increased, the person becomes supersensitive, highly irritable, nervous, and perhaps even hysterical. In such a condition, he is often more sensitive to physical impressions than he would normally be, and so it often occurs that a person suffering from ill health sees visions or apparitions which are imperceptible to his more robust neighbor.
There is a quote in The Secret Doctrine where Blavatsky says that rude physical health is many times an impediment for psychic perception. And this is because the more active the physical senses are, the louder they are, so to say. And then the subtler perceptions cannot impress the brain because the physical perceptions are too loud, they are too strong. So as Leadbeater says here, if certain conditions happen, what he described there, that there is not necessarily enough prana and the circulation of the blood is increased, which happens a lot, for example, when a person is stressed. We know that when we are under stress, we feel irritable, we feel anxious or nervous, because these conditions happen. There is not enough prana and the blood is going faster. That produces a particular physical state where our senses are like more tense, and therefore they may receive some psychic impressions. It may go in the wrong way and become, a kind of hysterical attack, or it may produce a vision, or many times the two go together. It is a historical truth that many of these sensitive people, even mystics, they had these also hysterical attacks because they were able to perceive on the higher planes because their nerves were naturally more tense than in other people. When this happens, when the regular physical evolution happens, then the nerves grow or evolve along with the ability of consciousness to deal with all this, and then the person doesn't fall into this irritability or any of these other problems. When for any reason, if we try to force the perception on the inner planes, as we explained in the previous class, then this lack of balance may happen. But the point here is that in certain physical conditions, we may be more open to psychic perceptions.
It must be remembered that the etheric and denser matter are really both part of one and the same physical organism, and that, therefore, neither can be affected without instantly producing some reaction on the other. Consequently, there can be no certainty that impressions will be correctly transmitted unless both portions are functioning quite normally. Any irregularity in either part may very readily disturb its receptivity and produce blurred or distorted images of whatever is presented to it. Furthermore, as will presently be explained, it is infinitely more liable to such aberrations during sleep than when in the waking state.
So here is the reason why he was going in detail into all this. If the physical and etheric aspects are not working properly, as he says, it disturbs the receptivity of the brain and produces a distorted image. There is, I remember a story where Damodar, he was an early Theosophical member. He was an associate of Blavatsky, and he was a disciple of the masters. And then he had, I think he was sleeping actually, and he woke up and remembered or brought to his memory the image of an accident that Blavatsky had. So Blavatsky was living somewhere else, and he reported to the people around that something had happened to Blavatsky. Now, his remembrance of what happened to her was distorted. It was more or less what had happened. Then they asked Blavatsky, and she confirmed that I think she had tripped and hurt her knee. But the remembrance that Damodar had was distorted. And this is an example, not that dreams are for that purpose, but this is an example of how impressions that he obviously saw on the astral plane what was happening to Blavatsky, but then in the process of bringing it to the physical brain, there was a distortion. So again, if we are talking about dreams as just something fun and some things that our brain are creating, then these distortions are not very important. But if we are looking at the subject of dreams as something that more and more may be important in the development of the spiritual life, then all these things begin to be important. And we are going to see some examples of this as the class goes on. So it is, and as he says, all these problems at the level of the brain that during our waking state may not produce a lot of difficulties, they do produce a big impact when we are in the process of bringing back the memory to the physical brain. 3, it should be 3, yeah.
Is this?
Oh, did you go back? Let me see.
No.
So, yeah, go there.
Astral aspect?
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, astral aspect. Still another mechanism that we have to take into account is the astral body, which is the vehicle expression of the astral plane, on the astral plane. This astral vehicle is even more sensitive to external impressions than the gross and etheric bodies, for it is itself the seat of all desires and emotions. It is peculiarly susceptible to the influence of passing thought currents, and when the mind is not actively controlling it, it is perpetually receiving these stimuli from without and eagerly responding to them. This mechanism also, like the others, is more readily influenced during the sleep of the physical body.
So now we are at the level of the astral body, as you can see in the table there. And the impressions that, so we have seen on the physical body, there is these electrochemical reactions which are transmitted to the brain and carry with it the prana. The prana is flowing through the etheric double, while the electrochemical reactions are going through the physical body. And these impressions are transmitted to the astral body, which is the one that transforms physical and etheric reactions into what we call a sensation and later on a feeling. So this is where science doesn't know how this happens, because of course within the physical science that we have developed at the moment, they cannot measure any other phenomena than what happens on the physical brain. And it is clear that an exchange of ions through the membrane of the neurons cannot produce per se a sensation, something that is so complex as a feeling or a sensation. Well, the ideas are, as I mentioned, is that the quality, just as the quality of the physical body is what we call chemistry and physics, the activity of the physical body is what in science we know as chemistry and physics. The activity of what we call the astral body is what we call feelings and sensations. So when all this stimuli goes to the astral body, then it is transforming these sensations. Now, the problem with the astral body, as you go to subtler and subtler aspects of a human being, these aspects, because they are lighter, they are more fluid, they are less dense, they can be more easily affected. They are more responsive. It's like the difference between having a very fine globe on your hand or having a very thick one. If you have a very thick one, you will miss many of the subtle impressions. If you have a glove that is very thin, then you can perceive much more. So the astral body is far more influential than the etheric and than the physical. And as we know in Theosophy, every feeling and every thought that we produce move astral matter that impact our astral body, and that impact tends to reproduce a similar sensation in our bodies. So if we go to a place where people were angry, we tend to feel that anger. We tend to reproduce that anger, whether consciously or unconsciously. Or the opposite is the same. We go to a sacred place and we tend to reproduce that kind of feeling. So this is important because most of the dreams that are more than just a physical activity, as we are going to see, there are some dreams that are just a physical effect of how the body works. But the dreams that are not, the dreams that are part of an experience of the inner planes, on the inner planes, most of those that we can remember happen on the astral plane, which is a plane of feelings, the plane of emotions. And they are perceived by our astral body. So when the astral body is perceiving all this, the emotional atmosphere may influence how the perception is received, in addition to the influence that may have how the physical and the etheric body are working. So we are going to see an example of this in the next slide.
For example, a man had been a drunkard and after a long period of total abstinence had succeeded in entirely destroying the physical desire for alcohol. Yet he stated that he still frequently dreamed that he was drinking, and in that state he felt the old horrible pleasure. During the day his desire was kept under control by the will, and causal thought forms or passing elementals were unable to make any impression upon it. But when the astral body was liberated in sleep, it escaped to some extent from the domination of the ego, and it again responded readily to these baneful influences and imagined itself experiencing once more the disgraceful delights.
So this is from a person that wrote a letter to Leadbeater, and this is an experience that is not uncommon. So the idea is that, for example, if a person is fighting a particular vice, in this case it was drinking, when the idea in Theosophy, for those who may not be aware of this, the idea of the ego, actually the way that it is used in Theosophical literature is from the Greek ego. The Greek word ego means I-ness. So when the ego is written in the capital E, it refers to the spiritual I-ness. There is also a lower ego, that is the ego that we normally talk about in psychology, is the personal ego. But the spiritual I-ness, this ego there, is what is expressing through the mental body, the astral body, and the physical body when we are awake. So while our consciousness is in charge, if we are resolved to fight a particular vice, we, little by little, we begin to gain control over that desire. And while we are in control, then the desire is for all purposes dead. Now, when in sleeping, the consciousness retreats to the astral body, and then there is a period during sleep that retreats even beyond to the mental body, and then the astral body is left just like the physical in this kind of slumber. Then the astral body may be influenced by external thought forms or elementals or feelings. So because there is still astral matter in the astral body that tend to respond to the old vice, when there is some thought form or a form of feeling that is similar to the vice that the person had, that stimulates the matter in the astral body. And because the astral body has this ability to produce images, just as the physical body does and the mental body does, we are going to see that later, it generates this kind of dream of the person drinking. And then many times it happens that when a person is fighting something, then the person goes to sleep and has these kind of dreams. And many times it has nothing to do with the person. It has to do with an external influence on the astral body that is still in a process of purification. So you can see here how something that is completely external and may not have anything to do with the consciousness of the person may produce this particular dream, and in the case of this person it was very worrisome because the person thought, why am I still having these dreams and enjoying this horrible pleasure, as this person put it, that he was trying to fight. So this is all part of a necessary understanding of the complexity of human beings, so that we can understand or interpret in an intelligent way what happens when we dream, for example. In psychology, they would say that he's repressing his desire, so when the conscious mind is not there, then the desire expresses itself. And even though that may be what happens, sometimes there is a difference between self-control and repression. Self-control is a conscious attitude in which we are putting order in our nature. Repression is an unconscious mechanism when a person, because of feeling of guilt or fear, the consciousness of the person cannot bear something, there is something that happens without the person knowing, unconsciously, that shuts those things off. But then when consciousness goes beyond the astral body in sleeping, the astral body is full of these tendencies, so it begins to reproduce all these desires. So in that particular case, you could say that these dreams are a product of the subconscious mind, as in psychology they say. But that is not always the case. Many times the dream is because of this external stimulation and has nothing to do with the person, with the consciousness of the person. So in psychology they call subconscious mind to a whole lot of phenomena that are not understood and that can come from many different sources. By studying all these teachings and what we are going to explore in this class, you can begin to put some order in these perceptions and understand what is going on. So this is an example of how the astral body may produce something, an image in your brain that had nothing to do with you or what you were really doing. And so can the physical body. We all know that sometimes a physical sound produces a dream related to that sound, or a slight physical perception. If your arm fell asleep, that may generate a dream that you are losing your arm, because any stimulation from the outside or from the inside, meaning from consciousness, tends to produce an image. So in our growth, in understanding our dreams, we need to begin to be able to differentiate when certain things were external influences and when some things were part of our conscious activity. So this is the last slide in what I wanted to present today. We have not yet gotten completely into the subject of dreams, although we just touched on this, because the first thing that Leadbeater wants to show is how the mechanism of consciousness works and all the different possibilities. This is a blessing and a curse in the Theosophical teachings. It is a curse in the sense that most people need a kind of simple blanket statement. Where if you say something that is very simple, then it's easy for that to catch on and for people to understand, okay, it is A or B. And that is fine, but then if you really want to go deeper, you need to know the complexities. And many times the simplistic approach produces misunderstanding. I am not sure if I gave this example here last class. I know I gave it not too long ago in one of the talks, so I apologize if I already did. But this idea, for example, that the mind or that illnesses come from the mind. That is an oversimplification of a fact. It is true that our mind can affect the body. It is not true that everything that happens to the body came from the mind, or at least not from this present mind. Many of the illnesses come from karma that was generated in many incarnations in the past. Some people are born with a particular illness before they could develop a mind on this incarnation. So many of the illnesses have nothing to do with how the mind of the person is working. There are many influences that can produce an illness. Now, if you have this simplistic approach, the illnesses are produced by the mind, the good aspect is that it is easy for people to see that it's important to pay attention to how you think. But then the bad aspect of that simplistic teaching is that it is not always true, and many times a person not only falls ill, but now feels guilty about falling ill because that person says, it's my fault. I have this cancer because my thoughts were incorrect. And maybe the person was a very loving-hearted person and cannot understand, and I have seen cases like this, cannot understand how he or she may have this illness when his or her thoughts were perfectly fine. So the same with, in the Theosophical view, there is the tendency to try to explain the complexity of the universe and human beings, which does exist there. This scares some people away, but on the other hand, if you really want to go deeper with all this, you need to know the complexity. So if we are doing just a class teaching people how to interpret their dreams, then the simplest your explanation, the better for most people. But if we are dealing with this from the spiritual point of view, to see, okay, this is a new realm of experience that as we grow spiritually begins to have an impact on our life, then you need to know what really goes on. You need to know the different possibilities, and although it may be confusing at the beginning, knowing that these possibilities are there, you begin to understand and recognize when something happens, and you are not going to be led astray by a simplistic view. So that's what I wanted to present today. Now we can go to some questions and answers or comments. Feel free to ask any question, or if you don't agree with something, that's perfectly fine. We can discuss it and explore it. So if you have a microphone, you can raise your hand. There is a button there with a little person with a hand up. You can raise your hand and we can give you the microphone. If you don't, you can write in the chat box and then we will read the question. So is there any question or comment?
Reactions to the exercise also.
Yeah, Marina is saying that we gave an exercise for the week last week. So if there is any comment or question about the exercise, the idea of the exercise was that when we go to sleep, we may be on the astral plane, but we may be within a kind of bubble, self-centered, surrounded by our thoughts and worries and our personal activity, and not be really aware of the environment. And actually, many times we are like that during our day. We are not really aware of people, of what is going on outside. We may be walking in a beautiful place and be just inside our head with all our thinking. So if we are going to be aware on the astral plane when we are sleeping, then we need to begin to break that bubble in our daily life. As we saw, there is a kind of echo or continuity between what we do when awake and what we do when asleep. So the exercise that we proposed was to work on this. So if there is any comment or question about that, that's also welcome if you want to contribute. And if not, it's perfectly fine too. Okay, Piervin, now you have the mic. What you have to do is to click on the mic's icon that you will see on the top bar there. Click on it and you will probably get a sign that asks you to allow the software to use your mic. So you have to say allow, and then you should be able to speak. So click.
Okay.
Yeah,
Do you hear me?
yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, we got a little late to class, so maybe you mentioned it. I have a question just because I went through this recently with having a baby. When the mother and baby, they're so connected on physical level, and so when I dream, and obviously when he was on the last trimester, when he dreams, do we as strongly connected on astral level too? Otherwise, if I see dreams and say they're scary, does he feel it? Like when he's in utero? What do you say?
Yes, the mother and the baby are more connected on the inner planes even more than on the physical plane. It is not uncommon that a person, when a woman is pregnant, certain desires appear on the person that were not really hers, and many times they come with the baby. The idea in the Theosophical view is that the soul that is incarnating brings his or her own tendencies from the past. So because the aura of the baby and the aura of the mom are interpenetrating, they affect each other. And many times there are these desires that all of a sudden come that really belong to the soul of the baby. The soul during when the body is just a baby, the soul is not all connected to the physical body yet. There is a few years in which the life of the baby is more still at the biological level. The brain is being developed and the whole organism, so that the soul can express itself through the brain. So for a few years, the baby is still not completely connected to the soul on the physical plane. It's like the real consciousness of the baby is waiting for the physical body to be ready. And this is also why this tradition of the guardian angel that the babies and little kids have is because nature, since the soul cannot really take care of it, of the body and the development, nature provides a kind of angel or deva, depending on what tradition you are talking about, that fulfills that purpose until the soul can really take care of the body. So most of the consciousness of the baby is really on the inner planes. And at that level, there is far more connection between everybody. You know, if you are on the astral plane, there is far more connection with a person than on the physical plane. So there is a constant, interchange of feelings and emotions and thoughts. And of course, this is why it's good if the mother can be as peaceful and happy as possible. But at the same time, life is life, and if not through the mother, then the baby, when growing up, will have to face difficulties and all this. So it's although it is better if the mother can have a good emotional and mental and physical environment, nevertheless, sometimes that is not possible, and it's not that you will, ruin the possibilities of the child. So in short, yes, there is a connection, a stronger connection. It's just natural that happens. I don't know if that answers, or you have any other question.
No, that answers this. Thank you very much.
Any other question or comment? All right, so I'll send an exercise as I did last week for you, in case you want to try to apply some of these teachings. And if next week you have any question or comment, you can bring them up at the end of the class. But otherwise, we'll meet next Tuesday. Thank you everybody for connecting and participating, and I hope you have a great week.